Hi, everyone.
Hello, welcome to our video series celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Pura Belpré Award. My name is Cecilia, and I'm a writer for Latinxs and Kidlit and the children's buyer for East City Bookshop, an independent bookstore in Washington, D.C.
And I'm Sonia, and I'm also a writer for the Latinx and Kidlit blog, and I'm an educator in New York City.
The Pura Belpré Award, established in 1996, is presented to a Latinx writer and illustrator whose work best portrays, affirms, and celebrates the Latinx cultural experience in an outstanding work of literature for children and youth. It is co-sponsored by the Association for Library Service to Children and the Young Adult Library Services Association, divisions of the American Library Association, and the National Association to Promote Library and Information Services to Latinos and the Spanish-speaking, an ALA affiliate.
The award is named after Pura Belpré, the first Latina librarian at the New York Public Library. As a children's librarian, storyteller, and author, she enriched the lives of Puerto Rican children in the U.S. through the pioneering work of preserving and disseminating Puerto Rican folklore.
Today, we have two amazing Belpre Award-winning writers with us to talk about their work. Guadalupe Garcia McCall won the Pura Belpré Author Award in 2012 for her debut novel, Under the Mesquite. And Yamile Saied Mendez won the inaugural Pura Belpré Young Adult Author Award in 2021 for her novel, Furia. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having us. It's such a treat.
The first question, I'm going to throw it to Guadalupe, and then Yamile will go to you. So we're here together because we're celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Pura Belpré Award. So the first question is, what does this award mean to you, and why is it so special, Guadalupe?
It's special for so many reasons. The first one being that it is about my life as a Hispanic person writing for Hispanic children. And that has been my entire life's work, working with Hispanic children, trying to get them to a better place in the world, to an understanding of who they are and what they can accomplish here in los Estados Unidos. So that was really important to me, and to get that award really validated my work. But more than anything, this book is about my mother who had the dream with my father to come to los Estados Unidos for an opportunity, for growth, for advancement, for just a better, happier, healthier life. And though she did not survive the cancer, her love of this country survived. Her belief in who we are as a people, as a community, survived and lives in us. And so for the award to celebrate that book is to celebrate my mother's life and my parents' wonderful desire to provide for their children and for the future generations. And so it's not just validating for me as a teacher, but for me as being my mother's child, the child of God that they raised, the child that they brought into this country. And so there's so many layers and layers. I could go on for days, but I'm gonna stop and let Yamile go.
Thank you, Guadalupe. And I love what you're sharing with us, because I have never told you, but Under the Mesquite has always been one of those books that I go back to over and over, because it spoke so much to me, and so much so that when I applied to the Vermont College of Fine Arts, I wrote on your book for the admissions essay. And it's always been one of those works that I've been like, oh, maybe one day I'll learn how to write a book like this. So thank you so much. And I'm so grateful that you shared your mom's story with the world, because it meant everything to me as an aspiring writer back then. And for me, the Pura Belpré, just like Guadalupe says, means so much, because it feels like a validation of all the work. The journey to publication that Furia took through the years was very long and winding, and had a lot of dead ends. There's a child hiding behind me. I'm a working mom, and okay, you can work on your book right there. I'm going. Okay, sorry about that, but every time although I say we're recording, he's always my little shadow. So thank you for understanding. But sometimes Furia had made a lot of dead ends. I was told over and over again that my book had a lot of promise and potential, that the writing was beautiful, but it was such a niche idea that a lot of editors and agents at the time when I was starting to shop this book wouldn't know how to market it or where to place it in the market. And then to know that it spoke to so many people who share a background with my character Camila. For those who don't know, Furia is about a soccer player girl who lives in Rosario, Argentina, and her dream is becoming a professional soccer player and all the obstacles that she has to go through to achieve her goal. And it's a story in which I poured all the love for the sport that my family was obsessed with, but I wasn't allowed to really be a participant in, and sometimes not even an observer. I felt very much in the margins of this part of my Argentine culture. And then to be able to write a story about a girl with this passion, set in the place that I love the most in the world, which is Rosario, and to know that it resonated with people who had a common background with my character and others who had nothing in common with her, but who found something in Camila's story that resonated with them. It was a very validating feeling. It also it motivated me to keep going, because sometimes you know how this writing process can be so solitary. And this story came out in the midst of the pandemic, when a lot of the things that we had planned with my publisher fell through for obvious reasons. But I had been so concerned that Furia wouldn't find its audience. And now this amazing recognition that I never expected, because in 2020 you had an abundance of books for young readers, and I felt like where in the past I could name with one finger the books from our community that were coming out. This last year there were just so many, and the quality was so it was superb. So to have Furia recognized like this, especially in the year 2020, motivates me every day to keep going, and hopefully it'll inspire young readers to tell their own stories too.
Great, thank you.
So Pura Belpré was a librarian dedicated to children and to storytelling. Why do you think it's important for today's children to have stories about the Latinx experience and told by Latinx authors? Yamile, do you want to go first?
Yes, I feel like you can't become what you have never seen. And when yesterday I was teaching a workshop to young teenagers, 13 and 14 years old, and they were asking me if I had always wanted to be a writer. And the answer was that yes, I have written all my life, but I didn't know that I could become a writer because I had never met an author in person. Argentina has a really rich heritage of famous and influential writers like Jorge Luis Borges and Julio Cortázar. But these were men whose experience was so alien to my experience as a girl living in a working class neighborhood, and that I couldn't relate to that. And so I feel now when I go to a school visit or I talk to readers and I see their little excited faces for the possibilities opening in front of them, that makes me so excited, because this work that we're doing really changes people's lives. It opens the mind for futures they could have never conceived before. So it's sometimes a little hard to be the representative of a community that's not highly visual in our mainstream industry. There are not a lot of darker skinned Argentine American authors writing right now. And so sometimes you can feel like you have to represent all of your community and do it perfectly for everybody. But what I have learned is to tell my own story. So hopefully others will be inspired to tell theirs, and we can all join together to enrich our literary canon.
Well, what about you?
I'll answer the question by telling you a little story about Summer of the Mariposas. So I was teaching 8th grade, And I had a group of AP, pre-AP students, and a lot of them were girls. And I had given them the Odyssey to take home. And we were going to start studying the Odyssey. So they took off with it Friday. And on Monday, when they came in, I noticed a difference in a couple of students who would always stop at the door and talk to me. And this time they walked right by me like I didn't even exist. And I thought that was kind of, and I thought, well, something's going on with those two, but I didn't think anything of it. And they walked in, and then I started hearing, because the bell hasn't rung, and I started hearing them just whispering and whispering. And now they've got a group and they're all whispering. And I'm like, what is going on over there? So, you know, the bell rings, I close the door and I come inside and I said, hey, and I'm going to call her Adriana. Her name was not Adriana. And I said, hey, Adriana, what's happening? What's going on? Is something wrong? And she said, well, miss, you know we love you. And when they start with that, you know something's going on. Something's going down. We know, you know we love you. But I don't want to read this book. I already told my mom I don't want to read this book. And she's going to support me. She says, I can read something else. You're going to have to pick something else because this is not working. And I said, what do you mean it's not working? And so we got into this discussion. And basically, she didn't like the book for its content when it represented females. She said, this book is about boys, and it's all about boys. They get all the powers, they leave home, they do all the fighting, they get all the magic, they get the treasures. And what are the girls doing, miss? They're weaving for 20 years. I'm not weaving for some guy for 20 years, no matter how cute he is. And she threw the book on the desk and I was like, what? And you know, as I am talking to her and we're discussing what the book does have and what we could do to study it from that perspective, we could literally look for clues as how women were so unempowered and how the little power they had and how they used it. And how can we talk about women and women's lives? And then they were all in, right? So I was able to turn it around and make it something we could study. But at the same time, in the back of my head, I am thinking, she is right. There is nothing out here for girls, right? And so I decided I'm going to tell the Odyssey for women with, you know, women's issues and blah, blah, blah. But as I'm driving home, something else clicks for me. It's not going to have Greek mythology in it. It's not going to have sirens and cyclops and Charybdis. It is going to have every Mexican icon that I can put in there, all the legends, all the monsters, all the religious references, everything that is been blended together between our cultures to create who we are on the border. And so it's kind of like this mesh of all the things that are important to me as a Mexican American, the things we believe, the things we talk about, the things we joke around about, the things we eat, the things we love. And I thought that is what we need, because I had already been empowered by this Pura Belpré. Somebody had given me permission to do this. And it was because of that permission from the Pura Belpré that I just went all in for Summer of the Mariposas. And I think in a way, that's the child in me playing. And that's the child that can be the eyes of children that can be opened for everyone when we're writing books like this. When we see a book with a sticker on it that says, look at this is an award-winning book, this is a valuable piece, and you see yourself in it, oh my God. I can't wait to see what our children produce, because Yamile is already showing what we can do. And then imagine what her work is going to open. So I am excited for that. I'm excited for seeing more books like ours out there.
That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
Yamile, the next question is for you. And you talked about this a little bit earlier at the beginning of our video. How has Guadalupe's work inspired you or influenced you in your own writing, in your own life?
Oh my goodness, in so many ways, Guadalupe, you're one of my like literal madrinas, literary madrina. And because when, you know, I learned English in Argentina as a small child, going to English class, like kids go to piano once a week for an hour. So my conversational skills were not really developed until I met a professor who was from the U.S. and had moved to Argentina, and she took me under her wing, sometimes to teach me even when I couldn't afford to pay her. She helped me pass the test to go to college. But what I'm trying to say with this tangent story is that in my life, English and Spanish were separate, because I had my English word in which I was preparing to go to college, and then Spanish was, you know, my family life, my friendships. Then when I moved to the United States to go to college, it was kind of the same thing. I studied international relations and Latin American studies. And in Latin American studies, I studied Portuguese because I was so fascinated by Brazilian culture, because of books that I had read as a child from several Brazilian authors that I admire a lot. But I had never seen a mixture of the cultures until I read Guadalupe's book. I didn't know that you could write in Spanglish, that and for a mainstream audience. I didn't know. Sometimes we being bilingual, perhaps you've come across the experience in which you're searching for a word, and when you're speaking Spanish, there's one in English that fits better, and vice versa. And I didn't know that you could do that with books. And reading your book, Guadalupe, helped me get permission in a way to tell it my own way. And be unapologetic about it, and also let that poetry of our language shine even in English. I always say that Latin American people are just poets of heart. Like you can hear pearls of wisdom from, you know, a food vendor in the corner, or like our song lyrics are full of poetry. And sometimes I had been very intimidated to let that poetess inside me shine, but reading books like Guadalupe showed me that you can write prose and let that poetry peek through. And that also a motto that has followed me throughout my life is to thine own self be true. When you're true to yourself, that shows on the page, that lets the story in your heart sing and develop and grow. And it helps inspire those who are reading to feeling with their own lived experiences. So everything you have done, Guadalupe, has, you know, been such an example to me, also how to relate with readers, and how to also turn around and help those people who want to, you know, like fulfill their dreams like we did. And so it's important to always pay it forward. We didn't have perhaps a community of Latina authors when we were starting out. And that's why I started writing in English, because there was nobody else here in Utah that I could have exchanged pages with, you know. And so my companions were these books like yours. And now that we do have a growing community, it's, you know, one of my favorite things to do is just paying it forward to those up and coming writers.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yamile.
You're welcome.
Me haces un honor.
Ay,
You honor me with your words. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's so sweet. Guadalupe, we'll give you the next question to start. So this question is about setting, right? So setting is very important in both of your books and both of your works. So Guadalupe, for you, it's usually about the U.S.-Mexico border, and Yamile, in your latest YA, Furia, we traveled to Rosario, Argentina. So Guadalupe, what do you think it's important about setting for you in your books and your work?
I want people to see the border for the place it is. And so I'm going to continue to tell different stories on the border, because it's a complex place. It's a diverse place. We are not one note. We don't all sit around at the breakfast table having breakfast tacos every morning. You know, we have lives that are super complicated, super complex, super diverse. There is so much to us that we could write a million books and not make a dent in it. And so I think for me, I need to continue to bring to life the border, specifically the towns around my town. So, my first one and my second one were in Eagle Pass and Piedras Negras, twin cities across from each other. My third one my third and fourth one, I decided to create an alternate universe, an alternate town to tell a story, because it was so sad what happened when they were lynching Mexicans that I didn't want to accuse one town, because honestly, it happened all along the border. And so I wanted to do that. But again, we go back to what happened historically to us. How did we get here from there? Why are the things we are dealing with right now happening to us? Because historically, this has been going on. And so that was really important to me, bringing not just the present, but the past, the history of our people and our communities on the border. And I'm writing one right now that I'm not going to tell you the title because then it'll give it away. But it's in Quemado. And Quemado is like, here's Eagle Pass, and Quemado is like a little blurb on top of it. It's a tiny, tiny census designated area. It's not a town by itself, although my sister would tell you it's a town. She lives there. But so my job is to show not just the bigger cities, but the tiny, tiny little villages like Yamile was talking about. These little villages that are, or was it Yamile? I'm not sure. But anyway, these little villages all along the border, because they're there, they exist, and the people's lives deserve to be spotlighted. They deserve to be given the space on our history and in our literature. So it's really important for me. It's my life's journey. It's my life's work.
Thank you, Yamile. What about you?
Well, of course, setting has everything to do in Furia. When I started writing it, I hadn't been back in Argentina for about 7 years. I was a young mom of 4 little kids, and because of different reasons, we couldn't go back and visit. And I was so homesick that I was like literally homesick in my body and my soul. And so writing Furia was an opportunity for me to go back home when I couldn't do it in the body. And I would, when my kids went down for their naps or at night, my husband used to work summer stuff, so he was gone all summer longs. And so it was just me and the page, and I could go back home and visit and recreate this place that I love. And because I love it, I could also say all the things that were difficult about living in Rosario. Rosario is a city known for the production of the most famous soccer players that you can think of, Leo Messi, Angel Di Maria, so many others. But these are all men's soccer players. But I knew, because of living there and having been born there, that women are have always been a part of the sport. I also wanted to show that Rosario and Argentina is a lot more than Buenos Aires and a lot more than soccer. Although the story is about soccer, there's a lot more about it. Of what makes my culture. And so I had also been reading the book The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón, which is one of my favorite books ever, because when I was reading it for the first time, I had never been in Barcelona, but Barcelona was like another character in the book. I could name other books in which, there were certain similar plot points, but the stories were so different because they were set in Barcelona. And so that's what I wanted to recreate in Furia. I wanted to create a world that when people read my words, they wanted to go to Rosario, even if there were difficult things about it or dangerous, things about it, they still wanted to go. After I had read The Shadow of the Wind, I had the opportunity to go to Barcelona with my husband, and I was showing him all around town, and he kept looking at me like, what? When have you been here before, in another life? I'm like, yes, in the life that I had when I read the book, And Carlos Ruiz Zafón says in his book that the writer of the story leaves a part of his soul in a book, and then the book collects a little bit of the soul of every person who's read it before. And I've always felt that was so magical and beautiful that I added that little piece in Furia when my characters are reading about their favorite book. And so I wanted to recreate something like that so that people would be excited to go to Rosario, that they would recognize the landmarks. I also wanted to show the beauty of this city that had no founder, but just sprouted organically by the sides of this beautiful river that I love so much. And in each of my books, location is a very important place, because even in those set in Utah, like my Wish Upon a Stray that just came out yesterday, it's set partly here in Utah, but it also shows a perspective completely different from somebody whose family comes from the Mormon pioneers from the 1800s, you know. So I wanted to show that a place changes and grows and develops depending on who is telling about it and who is experiencing it. And like Guadalupe says, I always want to show that we are here, we girls with big dreams, or first generation Americans, or people who speak multiple languages at home, we exist. And if sometimes if you don't see it, like we were saying in the previous question, if you don't see it represented in a book or in a story, sometimes it makes you feel like, you know, like, or makes you wonder if you really do exist in the world, and we do. And so it's always, I always work a lot on the setting, trying to make it into another character that people will learn to love and will learn to, you know, discover as they're reading. Especially these times when we can't really travel. It's my favorite thing to grab a favorite book and escape into its pages and go somewhere different.
That's great, thank you.
So Guadalupe, you referenced this a little bit earlier in your historical fiction books. And one of my favorite things about them is how you're highlighting historical events that are typically excluded from our textbooks. And even kids who grow up in the areas where those events happened may not learn about them in school. So I'm curious if there are any other historical moments that you're interested in writing about. And for Yamile, are there any moments from Argentina's history that you might be interested in writing about in the future? Guadalupe, if you want to go first.
As I was doing research for these two books, for Shame the Stars and All the Stars Denied, I started realizing that I could go 20 years back, and then 20 more years back, and then 20 more years back, or 20 years forward and forward and forward. And there's always, from the setting of those books, there's always something. There's always some big thing that is happening. I can't even tell you how many times I've been places and people will come up to me and they'll say, do you know about this? And they'll tell me about some little thing that made the news or did not make the news, but the local people know about it. And so my biggest thing right now, I think, is I want to go to the next generation, because Joaquin and Dulceña are the first ones in 1915. And then we have, in the 30s, we have their daughter. And then I want to go with her son into the 1950s, where my father was in the United States and experienced all the things happening with the Wetback Project. He was here working with a letter that said he could be here, but he was scared every day because of that that movement, the Wetback Project. And so I want to explore that. I want to explore that with the same generation, I mean the same family, because I want to continue to work on that family saga. I want to see how one family's journey in the United States looks like, and how different it looks, but also how the problems are always the same problems, resurfacing, showing their ugly heads again. And it's prejudice and racism. And I want to show that.
I love how you explain that, Guadalupe. Sometimes we think about history and historical stories as ecstatic in one time period and encapsulated and isolated from what we're living right now. But in fact, today, it's just a continuation of these issues that have been happening all over and over. And that's why even in our stories, we have to include this part of our histories that brought our characters to where they are today. Like in Furia, I talk about this jail for disobedient women that was established at the end of the 1800s in Rosario. It was called El Buen Pastor, and it's an actual place. It was a jail where disobedient daughters or employees or wives who didn't want to do housework were sent by their families, or hysterical women, you know, and then later on it became just an asylum for people who had mental illnesses. And so in my book, and eventually with the years, it also became a home for children who were orphaned. And so in Furia, it's super important for me to mention the past of that building, because now that the country Argentina is healing from a lot of trauma from the past, it shows in how some buildings and institutions are reclaimed for the community to grow. So in Furia, El Buen Pastor has been, it's a real place. It has been reclaimed by the community to help people come out of poverty and homelessness. They offer workshops to teach professions to children who are in a situation of living in the streets. And so that was a big part of how Camila gave back to her community, and also showing the early feminist movements in Argentina that gave way for her to be able to play soccer today. And that's why I'm always interested in the past, because it is who we are today. I have been working, I can't say a lot, but my second YA is set in a very convoluted time of Argentine history. I was born right at the cusp of the dictatorship at the end of the 70s in Argentina. And like a lot of people from our generation, I carry a lot of that country trauma, you know, collective trauma, because we're still learning how to live in democracy and how to heal from the tragedy of 30,000 people who disappeared. There are people my age who are still trying to find their identity, who were stolen as little babies. And so that time period was very, the youth was a very big influence. It's just, you know, like a rich soup for YA stories, because it was the high school students and very young college students who led the revolution for Argentina to gain democracy again. And the soldiers that went to the Malvinas War in 1982 were mostly 18-year-old boys who had been drafted, you know, and had to go and fight this senseless war. Most of these boys were boys from poor communities who were never seen again. And so I'm writing a story about two brothers at the end of the 70s, in which also rock en español was starting to be this huge revolution. And so I'm mixing again a lot of my loves, which are Rosario, the love of rock en español. Of course, there has to be a mention of soccer, because Argentina hosted the World Cup in 1978. And so it's an attempt, again, like Guadalupe said, to go back to our past, to uncover the layers of the events that brought us to where we are right now, to kind of understand how we ended up in this position and how we can live a better future, you know, for our children and grandchildren. And so when I was young, and, you know, democracy was new in Argentina, there would be so many events to celebrate, even, you know, the 5th year of democracy, which is, you know, sometimes for people who've never not been in democracy might not mean a lot, but for us was always a big event with parades. But growing up, I had always said, oh, I'm not gonna write about the dictatorship. But then as I grew up and I started analyzing what this meant for me and my family and, you know, and my country in general, I've been more and more drawn to this time period. So I'm really happy that my editors liked my characters and my idea. I got my editorial letter on Monday, so at least they didn't tell me to chuck it or put it away in a drawer. They told me to keep going and keep editing, and hopefully very soon I'll get to share it with all of you and the readers.
I wanted to add that, you know, I write about the border, but the keeper is not set in the border, but the characters have just migrated from the border. So to me, it's important to show that too, to show that we don't all stay on the border. Some of us are out there, you know, look at where Yamile is. Yes. She is from another country, but she's here. So this migration is important to us, and it's part of our human basic rights. And I want to show that. I want to, not just immigration, but migration too.
Exactly. Yeah, that's so important. Guadalupe, my family has been made up of immigrants for countless generations. We keep going from place to place, you know, and we spent a couple of generations in Argentina, and here I am again, first generation American, and, you know, like following in the family tradition of Trotamundos. But yes, that's the history of humankind, you know, like flying with the wind like little seeds.
Well, I'm super excited to read everything that you both are working on. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit of the future with us. I know everyone's going to be really excited. We like to usually end with some recommendations. So we would love for you to tell us a book that you're reading now or have read recently that you would like to spotlight for viewers who see this video. Yamile, do you want to go first?
Yes, I want to talk about Lilian Rivera's We Light Up the Sky. I had the honor to read an early copy of that book. It's about 3 teenagers in Los Angeles in the midst of an alien invasion. And that's all I will say, so I will not spoil it for anybody, but everything Lilian writes, it's full of nuance and multiple layers of what it means to be a Latina person living in this world, not only in this country, and being especially a Latina youth, young person, trying to figure out who you are, especially when humanity's fate is at risk. Her writing is powerful and magical, and 3 weeks after I finished reading this early copy, I'm still thinking about it. It comes out in September. So I hope you will all pick it up when it comes out and support our beautiful and dear Lilian.
And we'll just note in passing that Lilian is also a Pura Belpré winner from this past year, from 2020. I finished it last week and I agree with everything. I love it. Guadalupe, what about you?
I was fortunate enough to read and blurb We Are Not From Here from Jenny Torres Sanchez. It is an amazing read. It's beautiful. It's poignant. I fell in love with the main characters. I cried several times during the movie. I was going to say movie because it's that amazing.
It's like a movie in your mind.
It was a movie in my head. And I could see it all. It was just an amazing book. And she did justice to the immigrant experience, but also showed us how hard it is and how brutal it can be, that voyage here. And I was fortunate enough that I crossed with a pasaporte in the back of my father's car. You know, I did not have trauma, but when I read that book, I was in tears. I mean, flying out of both eyes, like we say, llorando con los dos ojos, porque it was so beautifully a beautiful testimony of that journey. And so I really loved it, and I hope everybody gets a chance to read that. I blurbed it because it broke and healed my heart.
Yes, it's superb. And it's also Pura Belpré.
It's also an honor, yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Guadalupe and Yamile, for being here and talking to us about books and all things Pura Belpré. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.